Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Grand Dragon. This one comes from Betamax V2, who said, a great uncle of mine passed away when I was a little boy. The family met at his house after the funeral to start packing things up and all, as he had no children and his wife died many years before him. My great uncle was a highly respected member of his small town. He was a banker of some sort, deacon in the church, and all those things that made him a good person. Well, tucked away in the attic, not covered by any dust mind you, was a large wooden trunk. Inside this trunk were the purple robes of a KKK Grand Dragon, various member listings, meeting notes, and all other sorts of things related to the KKK. Turns out that my great uncle was a very active, although very much secretive, member of the regional chapter of the KKK. Okay, I think we've already started up here with this video. Can you guys even imagine finding out that your relative, someone who was respected and loved by his family and friends, was a member of the KKK? Probably the most famous white supremacy group of all time. I guess you'd have a lot of questions after that, especially for your family. Like, how didn't they know? Moving on to number 9 now, we have the milk. This one comes from Kleinboy, 1987. Now he said, my great grandfather hit his wife with a fire poker and slit her throat. He then proceeded to blow his head apart with a shotgun. He sat down in a rocking chair and used his cane to push the trigger, all over an argument of whether it was too cold for me to walk to the grocery store to get some milk. That's it. That's the whole story. That's everything. There's nothing more to help us try and wrap our heads around what happened here. The couple were arguing over whether this storyteller would be alright getting milk due to the cold, and he murdered her over it and then killed her. Now I'm guessing by the fact that they're referred to as great-grandparents that they were pretty old when this happened. What would cause someone who's been in a marriage for decades and decades to just suddenly snap like that? I think there's more to this story, but honestly, I'm not even sure I want to know. At the number 8 spot now, we have Dog Heaven. This story comes from New Orpheus about his wife. He said, my wife and I were reminiscing about our childhood pets one day. When I shared how hard it was when my cherished dog had to be put down, she got to thinking. All of her childhood dogs were killed by semis. Now normally the thought of a dog getting loose and being run over by a semi-truck isn't that far-fetched. However, it had just clicked with her that her childhood home was in the countryside, down a long gravel road. The nearest highway was really far away. She decided that the next time she talked to her dad, she would find out what really happened. After all, now she is an adult and can handle the truth that a 7-year-old couldn't. Well, her dad just sort of smiled at her and said, oh honey, I never lied to you. Your childhood dogs were indeed hit by a semi-automatic. Yeah, a semi-automatic rifle. Now, to be fair here, it sounds like her dad was putting down the dogs when they were old or very sick instead of taking them to the vet to do it. I hear that's more common in certain rural communities around the world. I'm passing no judgment here. I just thought it would be a shocking story because she genuinely thought they were all getting hit by semis, as in semi-trucks, when it was actually semi-automatic rifles. There's quite a big difference between those two things. Next up at number 7 now guys, we have the judge. This one comes from Thing, who said, the real reason my aunt moved back to my hometown was she was briefly kidnapped by some bad guys she displeased in her work as a judge. The guy held her at gunpoint and told her she could either leave town in the next 24 hours or be taken back in. I was like 8 at the time, so everyone just told me she moved back because she missed us all. I found out about it when my brother and I were rehashing old stuff 10 years later. Now I'm sure all the adults in this family had mixed feelings about the auntie returning. Yay, auntie's back in town for good because she misses us, but oh no, it's actually because she was told to leave at gunpoint where she worked as a judge. That's really scary. It's also kind of scary to think that some criminals can subvert justice like that. Maybe you guys think this is exceptionally rare though. I hope it is. Moving on to number 6 now guys, we have The Other Child. This one comes from Egg Coroner, who said, I just found out that my grandparents wanted more kids but were having trouble getting pregnant for a second time. They adopted a toddler-aged brother and sister when my mother was 7. Soon after, my grandmother got pregnant. The girl then died from a very mysterious fall down the stairs and the boy was quietly given to another family. They never ever spoke of either child from that day forward. I thought she was pulling my leg, but a quick search turned up the girl's death record. I was never close to that grandmother and can't help but think back to every weird aspect of that woman and all the strange relationships she had with her family. Wow. that one is really crazy. I think what the storyteller is trying to suggest is that when the couple finally did get pregnant, they then didn't want their adopted children anymore, and so they staged a fatal accident for the girl and just sent the boy away forever. That is really dark. I presume that it was their mother who told them this story, and they thought, there's no way that's true, you must be pulling my leg. But yeah, I don't know, man, I've never heard a good joke that sounds anything like this. Coming in number 5 now, we have the photos. Conte Vincero said, we found a picture of 2 great aunts arm in arm with Hitler. We also found a signed photograph of Mussolini. Yeah, their great aunts were apparently best mates with Hitler. What an awful surprise to find out. I mean, the scary thing about this story is pretty clear. I guess the only positive to take away from it is that maybe their grandmother wasn't all chummy with Hitler. Maybe it was just 2 sisters. Clutching at straws here, I think. As for the signed picture of Mussolini, I think they should sell it and give the money to a nice charity. That's something that would have really annoyed him. At the number 4 spot now, we have life insurance. This one comes from Cotton Weasel, who said, I have a second cousin that murdered his siblings and parents for insurance money. He didn't get away with it, but only spent around 20 years in prison. He's out now, but no one talks about him or will speak to him. The only reason I even know is my parents warn me if he ever reaches out to me that I shouldn't talk to him. I managed to find out about him and what happened by Googling him. Unreal. I mean, for me personally, unless something awful has happened, there should never be a good reason to kill your parents and siblings. I actually can't think of any reason off the top of my head. That's pretty obvious for normal people, but to do it because of life insurance money, that's insane. I'm glad to hear that he got locked up, but yeah, I do think 20 years might not be enough for slaughtering a whole family in cold blood. Someone in the comments section of this story replied by saying, if he does contact you, the first thing you tell them is, I don't have any life insurance. That's some good but also quite dark humorous advice there. Moving on to the number 3 spot now, guys, we have the uncle. This one comes from Dogma3721, who said, an uncle I've never met, my mom's brother, killed my mom's parents when he was 16 in a fit of rage and burnt down their home in an attempt to cover it up. I've never met him, as he has been in jail on a life sentence since before I was born. I was only informed of his existence because my dad was blackmailing my mom with this. I mean, aside from it being scary, this story's just tragic. It's tragic enough to know that your grandparents were murdered and you never got to meet them, especially when you find out that it was your own uncle who did it. I bet it's even more horrifying for the storyteller's mum, especially now that the dad is apparently blackmailing her with this. I mean, that's a pretty scummy thing to do, as if she hasn't already been through enough in her life. Sorry, this is supposed to be a scary video, and now I'm just angrily ranting about things. At the number 2 spot now, we have the past life. This is just strange on every level. See if you can follow along with it. Someone on Reddit said, in 1976, my father was in the military and traveled to Guatemala after an earthquake. During the cleanup, he was at the Mayan site of Mixco Viejo. There were several burial sites overturned there. For some reason, unknown to me, he brought back the remains of a female Mayan Indian. He claimed to have loved her in a past life. These remains are still in the box in our attic. They are mostly dust now, with a part of the skull left. My father died in 1986, so I cannot ask him about it. My mother and sisters claimed her ghost followed them wherever they moved until my dad died. I am skeptical of that claim. I also have a half brother in Puerto Rico who is in his 30s that I will never meet. I only know his name is Ricky, and my dad had a fling with a Puerto Rican woman while stationed there in the army sometime in the 70s. Okay, breathe. There's a lot to break down there. I think taking the remains of a stranger from their homeland is very strange, as it is probably illegal too, but his family didn't even do anything when he came back with that. I know they said they didn't know, but now they do, and the remains are apparently still just sitting there in the attic. Weird. As for the last bit of the story, someone else pointed out that pop star Ricky Martin was born in Puerto Rico in the 1970s. Could it be him? And finally, number 1 now, we have Chucky. Disclaimer for this one, guys, this is pretty disturbing. Beastie J said, my mother told me a story about being at a small funeral in the late 1950s in East Texas. The deceased was mentally challenged and the family was relieved to have the child at peace. During the service, the coffin began to rock and crying was heard. Then she was taken outside and watched as the coffin was carried to the cemetery next to the church and hurriedly buried. I was telling my kids this story years later, and my mother walked into the room, listened for a moment, and asked, "Are you telling them about Uncle Chucky?" Okay, I honestly didn't even know whether or not to include this. I was back and forth for about 10 minutes. It's horrifying. I'm really hoping this story isn't actually real. I'm hoping it's very exaggerated, or maybe their mother was just messing around with them. This is really shocking stuff. Did this family really bury their mentally challenged son alive? Personally, I don't think so. I think even with the different attitudes of the 1950s, this is still the stuff of horror and fiction rather than real life and fact. I mean, it's my job to just present people's stories as they are told, but yeah, I want to hear if you guys think this one is legit.
Starting off this dark list, and at number 10 we have The Secret Farmhouse. A 25-year-old man escaped from a farmhouse and ran to the nearest public place, which happened to be a bar. He guzzled down 5 beers, and then he asked the bartender for help. He told him that he hasn't been outside for 9 years, and he's not the only one. Dutch police were called to the scene, where they found a secret staircase behind a cupboard that led them down to the basement. Inside this secret room, they found a man and his 6 children living inside of a small confined space. Some of these kids had no idea that the other people existed. They thought that they were the only ones left on Earth, and they were waiting for the world to end. But as it turns out, someone in their family was keeping them locked up in this secret farmhouse for 9 years. Is this real life right now? The police were unable to find their mother, and they suspect that she was either the one that did this or that she is dead somewhere. An unknown uncle in prison is at number 9. This scary family secret comes from Reddit. Apparently this person had an uncle in prison, but no one in her family ever told her what he was serving time for. The family never talked about him, and if he was brought up in conversation, everyone would just simply change the topic. But one night, she was watching a TV documentary about horrific crimes that happened in Perth, Australia. And guess what? One of them was about David and Catherine Burney and how they brutally murdered a call girl. Well, as it turns out, this guy had the exact same name as her uncle in prison. Could this be the same guy? Could this be your uncle? Well, she turned to her mom, who said, "So I guess you could put the 2 to 2 together. Well, I guess that's one way to find out that you have an uncle who murdered someone." Not the best way of finding out, but yeah. The murderous couple is in at number 8. Gerald and Alice Uden appear to be the most wholesome couple. They regularly attended church, and they seem to be super nice, genuine. They're very generous people. Well, don't be fooled by them, because both of them were hiding their own deep, dark secret for decades. Apparently they were both married to other people they met before. Alice shot her husband in the head and then decided to hide his body in a gold mine. Whereas Gerald confessed to shooting his ex-wife and stepchildren with a rifle that she had bought him as a present. I mean, is this real life right now? What are the odds of these two people finding each other? Did they meet at a Killed My Spouse group meeting, or maybe they swiped right on the Kill Me app or I've Killed Before app? It's also crazy how many years went by before they were finally caught by the police. This story is absolutely insane. Next up on our list, at number 7, antifreeze. A mother and daughter confessed to poisoning members of their family with antifreeze. Let me give you guys a quick backstory. The father died without warning, so they attributed it to natural causes. Well, 5 months later, her autistic son died from what seemed to be seizure-related complications. And then the following year after that, her daughter needed emergency medical attention, and this is for an organ failure. Yeah, something about this just doesn't seem right. The family's pastor thought so too, so he reached out to local law enforcement, who were able to get a confession out of her. And her motives were pretty messed up. She wanted her husband gone because of his temper. She couldn't deal with her autistic son, and her daughter racked up too much debt from college. So she had to go as well. She was gonna keep her other 2 daughters because she so loved them. But get this, the police found a diary belonging to her youngest daughter, and she wrote about how she helped her mother plan and execute the murders, and her goal was to eliminate the entire family until it was just her and her mother left. I mean, I can't even deal with this messed up family, so let's move on. The closet child comes in at number 6. For 3 years, a young boy was hidden inside of a locked closet while he was sedated by sleeping pills given to him by his mother. When neighbors asked Veronica Aguilar where her son was, she told them that he was placed in an institution in Mexico. But her 3 other children who slept on a bed just outside of the closet door knew the truth. But they were forbidden by their mother from saying anything to anyone. Sadly, this little boy's life came to an end when police finally discovered his malnourished body inside of the closet. It's insane because so many people like teachers, social workers, therapists, they all knew that he was a victim of abuse, but somehow they lost track of him, and because of their carelessness, his mother was able to lock him inside of a closet for a very long time until he ultimately passed away. Number 5, we have a crazy story about a girl who was raised by a man who killed her parents. Victoria Montenegro thought that her adoptive parents were kind and generous people who took her in after her real parents were killed in a shootout in Buenos Aires in 1976. Well, as it turns out, that was a complete lie. When she turned 24 years old, she discovered that the couple who raised her was part of the military regime responsible for her parents' disappearance. Her birth parents were actually abducted, abused, and assassinated by this group when she was only 4 months old. So her adoptive father took this opportunity to falsify her documents, hide her identity, and raise her as his own. This is just so messed up, so twisted. All of these years, she was being raised by a family that actually killed her parents and stole her identity. A serial killer in hiding brings us to number 4. Back in 1971, 13-year-old Charlie Brandt went into a full homicidal rampage. Without any warning, he shot his father in the back and then shot his pregnant mother while she was in the bath. He went to kill his other sister, but luckily his gun jammed. His father barely survived the shooting, but his mother wasn't so lucky. But because of his age, prosecutors never charged him with his mother's death. He was able to walk free and live a normal life. His family never brought up that night ever again, and he just went on as nothing ever happened. Well, in 2004, Brandt went on to brutally stab his wife 7 times in the chest, and he even decapitated her and ripped her heart out. Afterwards, he committed suicide. It's crazy because no one knew that he had serial killer tendencies except for his family, who kept his secret after all of these years. Now at number 3, dead bodies in the garage. Darren West spent 10 years of his life thinking that he only had 3 children with his ex-wife. But in 2006, this reality was shattered. He was serving time in prison for drug charges, but he was being released. While he was making arrangements to stay with his ex-wife, he came to the shocking truth. He found a dead baby in her garage, and it wasn't the only one. Between 1996 and 2006, Megan Huntsman had secretly given birth to 7 babies, and she choked them all to death. She turned her garage into a makeshift graveyard and kept this family's secret for years. As it turns out, she was addicted to meth, and that was her motive for killing these poor kids. I just can't believe that she was able to hide her pregnancy and murders this whole time. She probably would have taken this dark secret to her grave. The Turpin children makes its way onto this list at number 2. David and Louise Turpin managed to abuse their 13 children for years until one daughter was able to escape and tell the police. These poor kids were in such a controlling and abusive environment and had to do whatever it took to survive. In the media, their house was being called a house of horrors because some of the children were so far removed from the world. I mean, they didn't even know what medicine or the police were until they were finally rescued. They were only fed once a day and given a shower once a year. No one in the neighborhood had any idea what was going on inside of that house, and the parents managed to get away with this for a very long time. They're able to get away with their dark secret for many, many years. Now at number 1, we have a girl who was held captive for 24 years. This next story is a pretty famous case that emerged back in 2008. A woman named Elizabeth Fritzl, well, she told police that she had been captive for the past 24 years by her own father. Joseph Fritzl had assaulted, abused, and hurt her numerous times during her, imprisonment inside of her family basement. His abuse resulted in the birth of 7 children, where 3 of them remained in captivity with Elizabeth. One of them died shortly after birth, and Joseph disposed of his body in an incinerator, and the other 3 were brought up by him and his wife as their own. This secret went on for 24 years until finally the police discovered what was really going on. This story is so much more messed up, but I definitely don't want to get into all the horrific details. All I know is that Elizabeth is finally free, and I hope that one day she'll be able to move past this. I feel so bad.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have fake death. This one comes from a Reddit user who actually deleted their comment, but it was saved to another site. The story goes like this. I remember my mother calling our landlord to inform him of my brutal and untimely death. I was about 6 years old at the time, happily colouring in at the kitchen table alive, obviously, listening to her sob and relay the details of my horrific death to this man. Kidnapped, violated, beheaded. She wanted to borrow money from him for funeral expenses. After she hung up, she turned to me and said, "Don't tell daddy about my phone call, okay?" I nodded and went back to colouring. This was one episode in a long history of screwed up behaviour coming from her, but it's probably the first one I remember. I was about 15 or so before I looked back and was struck with a sense of, well, that's definitely not normal. No, it's not. No, that is not normal at all. I don't think that was normal for most of you guys. I wonder if they ever told their dad about that. Or maybe the landlord. They might be surprised to see that they're still alive. Next up at number 9 now, we have the made up kidnapper. This one comes from Reddit user Simony. She said, when I was 13 and my little bro was 11, we stayed at the mall way past when we were supposed to come home, like a few hours. This was a time before cell phones. On the way home, we hatched a scheme. We devised a lie that involved us being detained by a mall security guard for running down a back hallway of the mall. We even came up with a real reason to base this security guard on in case we were questioned separately. We pretty much ascribed to our mum the pro wrestler Dean Malenko. It was perfect. Little did we know there was a guy in our area posing as a cop and abducting children. Mom called the cops. My brother and I separately had to give statements about what happened. The thing is, the lie held up. The cops told Mom that there was a good chance that this was the guy. If I recall correctly, there may have even been a little blurb in the news about a sighting of this guy at the mall we frequented. We threw a wrench in an investigation, caused a minor local scare, scared the shit out of our mum and ruined our freedom to walk to the mall by ourselves for 6 months, all because we didn't want to get in trouble for being 3 hours late getting home. Yeah, it was pretty stupid, but no one was ever the wiser. That's a tough one. At what point would you tell your mum that that time that you almost got kidnapped never actually happened at all, and all the times that she worried about it since then? Yeah, no need to worry. I think at that point, maybe it's just best to leave it. Moving on at number 8, we have the bottle. I don't know who wrote this one because they have since deleted their account. Perhaps they were too ashamed of this story. They said, I replaced bourbon from a priceless bottle of liquor with Evan Williams when I was 15. I found out later my parents were saving the bottle for their 50th anniversary. It was given to them by my great grandpa at their wedding. Still have 23 years to break the news. That one, I don't know what it is about that one. It gets me. I feel so bad for the parents. They're saving this bottle of really expensive stuff. It's very romantic when actually it's just pretty normal bourbon. I mean, he has to replace it with an expensive one, I think, one day. And even then, it's going to take some real explaining. Moving on to number 7 now, we have the strangling. This one comes from Hakeldama, who said, my stepdad strangled my mom. I came out of my room, saw him on top of her with his hands around her throat, and she was turning purple and making noises. I told her to keep it down because she woke me up, and I went back to bed. I didn't think about it much after that. It didn't hit me until my early 20s that, oh shit, my stepdad was in the process of actually trying to murder my mom, and I told her to basically die quieter. Wow, I wonder if he has ever talked to his mom about that, or a therapist, or maybe even the police actually. What advice would you guys give to this person? Next up, number 6 now, we have Kitty. This one comes from Reddit user Snoops12312. She says, my fiance's daughter is 6 years old and hugged a kitten to death when she was 2. Will not be telling her about that for a very long time. Edit, hopefully never telling her about it, only if she asks. Edit 2, to clarify, because a lot of people have been responding with the exact same thing, only if she remembers this event and comes to us for confirmation. We are not going to lie to her. Wow. That's an interesting one. Can you guys imagine how that conversation is going to go? Hey, mum and dad, I know this is going to sound really crazy, but I just had this strange feeling that I sort of hugged a kitten to death when I was younger. That's not true though, is it? It can't be. Sit down, my daughter. It all happened when you were 2. Next up at number 5 now, we have the Pyromaniac. This one comes from Reddit user Jaxes. They said, when I was about 11 or 12, I was going through my Pyromaniac stage. One Saturday, I decided I would grab a steel can and fill it with gasoline and head to the woods. Now, this wasn't just your typical old can of SpaghettiOs. This was a 1-gallon bulk-sized can filled to the brim. I took it to the woods and decided it would be cool to just light it on fire and see what would happen. I lit it and it caught like I expected and kept burning inside the can. After about 15 minutes I got bored and went to try and put it out. In the process I knocked the can over, spreading gasoline all over the forest floor, and it erupted into a ball of flames. I quickly ran back to my house to get water and I came running back with about 5 gallons. By this point the fire had spread tremendously and my efforts were useless. I decided my best bet would be to run inside and play video games. Luckily this spot in the woods was a pretty good ways away from my parents' house, so I didn't draw any parents' attention immediately. After about an hour or so, the entire fire department is on the scene, battling the 3 to 4 acres of forest fire that is roaring. There was a road that runs behind my house and the fire basically engulfed all of the forest separating my parents' house and this road. This road is notorious for drug dealers and meth houses. While the firefighters are trying to battle the flames, it's discovered that the house closest to the fire is a rather large cookhouse, and cops show up and a huge bust goes down. Naturally, the fire was blamed on them and my parents just accepted that. It's now 20 years later and my parents still don't know, nor will they ever know. Wow, I'm really lost for words with that one. I mean, can you even imagine sitting your parents down after 20 years and being like, yeah, I almost set fire to our entire neighborhood, possibly killed us, and got all the fire and police officers involved? Like, what? That is something though where I think you'd take a look at the statute of limitations and, you know, maybe go to a police station and be like, listen, here's the story. But, you know, that's just me. Coming in number 4 now, we have Putting Down. This one comes from Miss Sandwich. This one's addressed to her parents and it goes like this. When you guys went to Hawaii, I put Milo the cat down. He was sick, in incredible pain, couldn't eat or drink, couldn't even move to get to the litter box. When you left on vacation, he was too weak to even yowl in pain anymore. I couldn't stand to see that cat in so much pain and so afraid, so I did the only thing I could do to help him end his life humanely. My parents were 100% against putting down a pet regardless of how much it's suffering, so they would be beyond mad if they knew this. Wow, that's a really serious one. I mean, what do you guys think about that? On the one hand, nobody wants an animal to suffer, but on the other, do you think they should have killed the cat? Is that up to them? I can honestly offer nothing to that debate other than those questions. What do you guys think? Moving on to number 3 now, we have The Trail. This one comes from Reddit user Leathery Hamster. Great name. She said, my husband and I have told our daughter that she was born with a tail. If you ask her what happened to it, she'll say, we had to cut it off when I was born because it wouldn't fit in my pants. She honestly believes us, which might make us terrible parents, but I think it's pretty hilarious. We will tell her that she wasn't actually born with a tail before she starts school. Other than that, 4-year-olds don't have many secrets. Wow, another incredible one. Now here's the real question. Is that cruel? Is that funny? Is that a little bit of both? You decide. Next up, number 2 now, we have The Family Jewels. This one comes from the River Jordan 72. She said, I stole and pawned off some of my mom's old jewelry. I was planning to leave home and I knew about an old box of jewelry that she hasn't touched in forever. My girlfriend and I picked up a few gold rings and took them to a pawn shop. I told the man at the shop that my grandma had passed away and left me some jewelry. He asked no questions and we ended up making almost $1,000. To this day, I'm not sure if she ever found out, but I haven't brought it up. I still feel bad about that. I should really make it right. I was such a little as a kid back then. Well, with this one, at least he feels bad about it now. I guess that's something. It's strange because I think some kids don't understand the value of things, especially to their parents. Stealing is wrong, but stealing your dead grandma's jewelry from your own mom to pawn off for cold hard cash, I think that's next level. And finally, number 1 now, we have Curiosity. This one comes from Reddit user Commander Ziliana. He said, I killed the neighbor's cat when playing baseball. This is straight out of a movie, but we were playing in the yard, and when my friend pitched to me, I swung and hit the cat who was jumping trying to chase a bird who had flown by me. I knew the cat was dead. I don't want to go into detail about how I knew, but me and my friend basically took him to the woods and buried him. We bought some roses and put them on top of the grave and said a prayer. The neighbours never mentioned the cat. They never hung posters up or even asked if we'd seen him. They just said he ran away and he's probably dead. I still feel terrible 20 years later.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have King Charles I. Okay, so this is one that goes way back and it really creeps me out. So King Charles I was tried for treason after the Civil War and he ended up being beheaded in 1649. I guess in the 1600s everyone was beheaded, so this wasn't necessarily abnormal, which certainly is weird, but that's a history lesson for another day. The weird part, however, is that apparently his head was sewn back on his body so that he could sit for a portrait, or it was perhaps supposed to be a sign of respect. Either way, it's weird and very gross. I feel terrible for whoever's job it was to do that, and I also feel bad for the artist who was forced to paint that. Talk about a little traumatic. It does certainly make sense though that people say that Charles' ghost still haunts a building, because there is no amount of haunting that could make up for being beheaded and then having your head sewn back onto your body. No thanks. In our number 9 spot today we have the Kensington system. Queen Victoria's reign began in 1837 and it lasted up until her death in 1901. She was just 18 years old when she found herself on the throne, and it was all by chance as she was actually 5th in line when she was born. This is all stressful enough, but certainly one of the worst parts of her upbringing was being brought up under the Kensington system. This means that her mother, Duchess Victoria of Kent, who created this system in order to control her daughter, literally just isolated her away from all of her friends and even from other family members, and apparently this was done to keep her quote-unquote pure. The Duchess would monitor her every move. She would decide who she could see and who she could speak to. Victoria only had 2 friends she could play with growing up, one being her half-sister and the other being her mother's attendant, Sir John Conroy. Victoria was even forced to share a room with her mother, and until she was the queen, she couldn't even walk down the hall by herself. In the end, Victoria placed a lot of blame on John Conroy for manipulating her mother. She even called him the demon incarnate. In our number 8 spot today we have money making. We obviously know that the British royal family is rich. It certainly isn't a surprise to any of us to hear that. I mean, they made a tax-free $97 million in 2017, so it's not like they're struggling by any stretch of the imagination. And while there are claims that most of their income comes from their private estates and tourism, not everyone believes that this is the case. There are actually quite a few people who believe that the royal family costs British taxpayers a whopping $450 million a year. That's a ton of money. I truly do not know enough about anything to really choose a side, but it certainly is something to think about. I know with taxpayer money we pay a lot of salaries, and it's usually for a good reason, but $450 million is definitely next level. In our number 7 spot today we have the change of name. So for us here in Canada, later in May, we have a day called Victoria Day. We set off fireworks, people have barbecues, it's like one of those types of holidays. Back in 1819, Queen Victoria, of course, before she was queen, was christened in a mostly private ceremony. It was quite small, her uncle only let a few people come, and at the time of this christening her name was Alexandrina Victoria. Apparently during this time period the name Victoria wasn't looked at as a regal name. It had French origin and was almost unique at the time. So flash forward to when Queen Victoria is first taking the throne, she begins getting advised to change her name. They thought that it would give her a better public image if she had a more traditional name. Clearly, as the history books and our Canadian calendars show us, Queen Victoria said, yeah, no thanks, I'm not gonna do that. In our number 6 spot today we have the controversial history. The British royal family has quite a history of being perhaps less inclusive of others than would normally be accepted. There is actually quite an extensive history of racism in the royal family, and as we now know, especially after that Oprah interview last year, things haven't necessarily recently changed either. There have been certain gestures or small remarks made here and there that have definitely been a little out of touch, I'll call it. And unfortunately Meghan Markle, being a biracial person, had to experience a lot of it firsthand. I mean, just to give a few examples, Prince Philip did ask Indigenous Australians if they still throw spears at each other, okay? And once, Princess Michael of Kent tried to apologize after being called out for saying something racist, and this is what she said, quote, "To call me racist It's a knife through the heart because I really love these people. I even pretended years ago to be an African, a half-caste African, but because of my light eyes I did not get away with it, but I dyed my hair black. Okay, there is so much to unpack in that one sentence alone, but I have an extremely strong feeling that this apology probably wasn't well received, especially considering it lacked the whole apology part of an apology. In our number 5 spot today we have Boy Jones. Okay, I've heard of people being called Boy Jones before, but little did I know Boy Jones was a very real and very creepy person. His full name was Edward Jones, and this little rascal basically stalked the Queen from 1838 to 1841. He managed to break into Buckingham Palace, and we aren't just talking about once. No, we're talking about many times. He knew exactly where to go and what to do, and once in the castle, he would hide under the Queen's sofa, he would sit on her throne, and worst of all, he would go through her clothing. Like, what a little creep. He even went as far as to steal her clothes, which is just stupid. Of course, taking evidence of your crimes is just bad practice. Thankfully, he did finally get caught, but man, a few years of sneaking in and sitting on the throne, that's crazy. In our number 4 spot today we have messy relationships. Joan of Kent lived during the 14th century in England, and she was known as being one of the most beautiful women in all of England. She was said to be quite loving, but it is also said that she had quite a whirlwind and controversial love life. So basically, Joan was only 12 when she had her first marriage. I know, horrifying now, but as was the practice at the time. She married a knight named Tom Holland, but when Tom went to war, Joan was approached by another man, the son of the Earl of Salisbury, who asked for her hand in marriage. Despite the whole Tom situation, she said yes, because at this time there was no way for anyone to know who would be coming back from battle, and she just assumed that Tom had died. It was of course quite the shock to everyone when Tom ended up returning, very much alive, to find out about all of this. A legal battle followed, which Tom ended up winning, and him and Joan went on to raise 4 children. After Tom's passing, however, Joan would go on to marry again, to the dismay of many people. This time she would marry the son of King Edward III, and she went on to become the first Princess of Wales. In our number 3 spot today we have royal affairs. There have been many rumors over the years about the British royal family and their extramarital affairs, and I'm saying that this goes way back. So far back that one of the first accusations of this within the royal family dates all the way back to King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Since then it has only continued with people such as Princess Margaret and Peter Townsend, Princess Anne and Commander Timothy Lawrence, and of course Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles, just to name a few. The latter of those definitely being the most famous, especially when Prince Charles was confronted about it by his wife at the time, the beloved Princess Diana. Apparently Charles responded to the confrontation by saying, quote, "Well, I refuse to be the only Prince of Wales who never had a mistress." Maybe not the attitude to keep when speaking to your wife who you're cheating on. I don't know, just a thought. In our number 2 spot today we have Prince John. This one is said to possibly be one of the darkest secrets of the British royal family. Prince John would have been the uncle of Queen Elizabeth II, but he passed before she was born. Prince John was the 6th child of King George V and Queen Mary, and it is said that he suffered from seizures, likely as a result of epilepsy, although it's hard to diagnose for certain because of all of the secrecy surrounding him and his illness. From the age of 4, when he had his first seizure, until his untimely and early death, Prince John lived in a separate estate where he was cared for by a governess. Many people have since criticized the royal family, calling their treatment of Prince John as callous or inhumane, like they were hiding him away for being ill. Of course, the palace was concerned with the monarchy's public image, and there was a belief at the time that royals shouldn't have any physical or mental ailments, although that of course is impossible. They also didn't include him in public events, which could have been another image thing, and also perhaps because of a worry that he might have a seizure at one of these events. At the end of the day, it was definitely a different time, but the idea of excluding him because he was ill truly is a very sad thought. In our number 1 spot today we have the flag at half-mast. It is normal for a flag to be flown at half-mast following a great tragedy, so this certainly is not a dark tradition that the royal family has, but it's the time that they did not do this that is dark that I want to talk about today. After Princess Diana's death, people everywhere began mourning the loss, especially considering how young she was and how it all happened so quickly and unexpectedly. But the crazy thing, or I guess when you really think about it, the potentially sinister thing about it, is that the royal family just continued on as if nothing happened. Of Of course, business still needs to be conducted at times despite grief, but for many of them, there simply was no grief. The flag at Kensington Palace wasn't lowered to half-mast until the people complained about it, because they obviously felt like it was a slight to the princess. There were no public statements made until a day before her funeral, and there were many people who believed that if no one spoke up about this, that there may have never been any action taken by the family at all.